Hi everyone, Richard here from Calvin Wazoo with another video for you. And today it's the third installment of the Genealogy of Music. And today's subject is going to be Johnny Guitar Watson. Need to have my fruit juice for today. Okay, Johnny Guitar Watson. Now, how are we going to begin this genealogical study? Well, we're going to start with Frank Zappa. And in Freak Out, which I've mentioned before, there is this list of people that Frank cites as inspirations and also people who helped him produce this album. And Johnny Guitar Watson's name is right there, along with a lot of other great blues, R&B, doo-wop legends. But anyway, so there's Johnny Guitar Watson. Now, Freak Out was released in June of 1966. And Frank Zappa said sometime, not sure when, but he's quoted as saying that it was the hit, 1956 hit from 10 years before by Johnny Guitar Watson that inspired Frank to play the guitar. And that song was 3 Hours Past Midnight. So that's pretty significant because if you know much about Zappa's background, his background, it sprang from being a drummer with percussion. You've probably seen the video on YouTube that shows Frank on an early TV show playing the bicycle. And one of his earliest compositional or composer influences on his musical life was Edgar Varese, who was very much crafting orchestral style music that was very, very heavy on rhythm and percussive instruments. That must have been a pretty significant song for Frank to then be inspired to take up the guitar. And I've got a video that I found on YouTube. A link to that video of that song is in the Down Under, so be sure to check that out. So Johnny Guitar Watson had a very fast, springing, and flamboyant career. This is his debut. This is a reissue of the debut album, eponymously titled. It's got some extra tracks. Most of the tracks on here were recorded in 1961 and 62. The album was released in 1963. But there are some things that, particularly Gangster of Love is on here, which was a big hit single in 1958. Interestingly enough, though, Gangster of Love was a B-side. Now, Johnny Guitar Watson, as I said, was making a name for him pretty quickly, and he ended up connecting with Johnny Otis, who also was connected with the promotion and working with a lot of blues and R&B singers and groups during that time. And as we get into the 60s, in early 1970s, we see a lot of other influences spreading out from Johnny Guitar Watson, but we can even go back earlier to the early 60s, because if you listen to Johnny Guitar Watson and his style of singing, he's just got this way of just getting, he gets out there and his voice kind of, it's not a growl really, but it gets this extra uh, this extra punch to it when he's singing, and someone who deliberately adapted her singing style to match his was Etta James. Etta James toured quite a bit with Johnny Guitar Watson early on because she was also connected with Johnny Otis. She, something that she said, she admitted her vocal style was adapted to mimic Johnny Guitar Watson. She said his singing style was the one I took on when I was 17. There were other musicians influenced by him, some admittedly so, some perhaps maybe not so admittedly so. For example, Steve Miller, he did a cover of Watson's Gangster of Love, and then he sort of inserted the idea, he embellished songs with, is where he was talking about he's the gangster of love and the gangster of love is returning. You'll hear those references in the songs Space Cowboy and The Joker. Time for another sippy. By the way, that cocktail is made with Bacardi Limon, some sweet and sour, and some mango nectar. You can add a little vodka to it as well. Good. Jimmy Vaughn also said that Johnny Guitar Watson was a major influence on both his playing and his brother Stevie Ray Vaughan. Although I do think Stevie wasn't quite as influenced as Jimmy Vaughn. When you listen to a lot of the material produced by the Fabulous Thunderbirds, you're going to hear Jimmy Vaughn playing guitar much more closely in a style to what was developed by Johnny Guitar Watson. There was one comparison, however, that really annoyed Watson, and that was whenever he was questioned about some of Jimi Hendrix's antics while playing guitar. Because, Watson also had this reputation of being very much a showman and very flamboyant when he was performing. He really didn't like that comparison. In fact, when he told a music writer one time, I used to play the guitar standing on my hands. I had a 150-foot cord, and I could get on top of the auditorium. Those things Jimi Hendrix was doing. I started that shit. Well, by the late 1960s, heading into the early 1970s, Watson was still producing records, but he wasn't doing so well. His career was kind of fallen off the spotlight. Much of his material is rooted not just in blues, but also in R&B and rockabilly, and some soul. And by the late 60s and into the early 70s, that style of music was kind of falling off the charts. And in fact, Watson was hardly ever finding himself in the R&B charts, let alone the Billboard charts. So it was almost like he was becoming forgotten. Well, that all changed with Frank Zappa's release, One Size Fits All, because he invited Watson to show up and appear on this album. And he does. He's on the flambe vocals and the exit vocals for both San Bernardino and Andy. I mean, and you could hear his signature style of singing, that I was talking about, one that Etta James also adapted. And there were some other albums that Johnny Guitar Watson did with Zappa, including the Them or Us, where basically he's just showing up in this little snippet of conversation, about France, if you are familiar with that in that album. And then he also shows up as a character in Thingfish. I don't have these on vinyl yet. Keeping my eyes open for reasonable condition and reasonable price. But anyway, Thingfish in 1984, when he appears as the character the Brown Moses. But that jump-started his career. So Johnny Guitar Watson was kind of like back in the spotlight, and he was recording again, producing albums that were starting to get attention from consumers again, and he was getting noticed. One of those, I have a couple, is this one, Ain't That a Bitch, which this is a Record Store Day release, which came out on some very, very cool blue vinyl. Very sweet. But that was released in 1976. So that would have been just the year after One Size Fits All. Also, the album here, A Real Mother for Ya, which was 1977. These were two very strong albums that he was able to then put out there and sort of reintroduce himself into the music scene, and he continued to create many other albums. And like I say, it was 1975 for One Size Fits All, so we're looking, 9 years later, he's coming back and making these cameos in some other Zappa productions. So I remind you again, if you want to check out some roots of different artists and how they influence more contemporary musicians, songwriters, rock stars, this is a good place to start because, as I said, it's this list right here that has a ton of names, and you can find a name in there, and then you can just, maybe do a little internet search and find out some information about that artist. Look up their releases in Discogs. You can also use the All Music Guide online because they will also provide ratings for the different releases, that's kind of subjective, but nonetheless, they usually have most, if not all, the catalog of that artist in their system, although Discogs is going to be better for a more complete database. And then you can find out about new artists and expand your horizons of music, which is the whole point of these episodes about the genealogy of music. Because we come right back, remember, the goal is to always enjoy your music. And don't forget to subscribe, click the like button in the down under, check the link for that other video that I'll have down there in the down under. And enjoy yourself, and I hope to see you again soon. Remember, enjoy your music.